Welcome, fellow Lions fans. So great to get a win just before the bye. Probably my favorite win of the year is the one we can get before the bye because we get to enjoy a whole weekend of games, basking in the victory sung while watching other teams beat up on each other and also laugh at them for getting upset. Those of you who are watching the Tigers and MLB know that an NFL win is like 10 straight baseball games. Conversely, an NFL loss is like losing 10 straight games, so that's just terrible going into a bye week. This was also a special win because it was Monday Night Football. We were wearing the formal blacks, which looked really good. I still want to see another alternate uniform, though, with all silver or all chrome. I think that would be pretty cool, too. Maybe Terrian will use this bye week to reevaluate his priorities, as he just can't keep it in his pants, apparently. Another pass interference for Arnold, which is now 5 in 4 games. A couple holding calls also for diversification. At least I hope you're wrapping it up, Terrian, because at this rate, you're going to be paying child support to half the refs in the league. Stop banging the refs' wives. I'm Jimmy Liao, University of Michigan Medical School grad, board certified in family medicine. This is the medical edition of the Detroit Lions podcast. Today is Thursday, October the 3rd. I'm going to review the Seahawks game, do a status report on the team at the bye, talk about why the Niners' Christian McCaffrey went to Germany and wasn't just to be first in line for Oktoberfest, and discuss some major Cowboy injuries that are already impacting the Lions game next week. So let's get to the Seahawks game recap. First, I want to mention that Khalif Raymond got a catch against the Seahawks, so it was nice to see he was able to find some new gloves after giving his last pair to my kid. Those gloves are already framed on my kid's wall, so thank you, Khalif. For those of you wondering, I inspected Khalif's gloves to see if there was anything special about real NFL gloves, and there isn't. They're no different than any no-name generic football gloves that I've got on Amazon. Now, while Khalif hasn't had much receiving production this year, just 4 catches, it's good to see him still involved in the offense because if JMO or Saint get hurt, we are going to need him. Another guy that was nice to see was James Houston, who got 14 snaps. Not really much production there, but it's early, and let's give him a break here. He came off a severe season-long injury with that right high ankle sprain with a fibular fracture. This preseason, he was also hampered by a knee bone bruise. I think that ankle injury from last year, it's a big deal. He may never be the guy from his rookie year, but let's give him a little bit more time here before making a judgment. It's still early. Let's give him a few weeks before we judge him. Coyote Awosika played well at the left guard spot. Before this game, he had only 6 total starts and was pretty solid in them, including last year in the championship game. Really great to have him as a solid guard backup. Glass got moved to center, and that seemed to go very smoothly. All good news there so far in replacing Frank Ragnow. Now let's get to game injuries. There were a couple minor concerns that hopefully don't turn into anything major. Certainly a much better health outcome than the Cardinals game of last week. Let's start with Kirby Joseph. In the 4th quarter, late in the game at the 3-minute mark, his body got torqued and bent to the right as he made a tackle. He came up reaching for his right hip area. Hopefully this just indicates a simple strain of the oblique or the back muscles. A hip pointer can cause pain in that area, but there was no impact to that area that I saw in video. Now the main concern here, though, is that the mechanism of this injury is very similar to the right hip injury he suffered last year, also against the Seahawks. Watch the videos to compare. I have the videos on my Twitter as well as on the Lions Wire article, the post-game article. Last year, Joseph finished that game after hurting his hip, but missed the next 2 games. He ended up having off-season hip surgery, presumably on that right hip. Joseph appeared to be in good spirits after the game, got a game ball, so hopefully nothing comes of this. Currently, it's Thursday, 3 days after the game. Haven't heard anything yet, so no news is good news here. And speaking of no news is good news, Carlton Davis is another one. 3rd quarter. Video wasn't clear, but Davis appeared to be having some kind of pain in his left shoulder or arm area after the play. He was hit hard in the right shoulder, but it wasn't certain if that actually had anything to do with the injury. Davis left the game just for a play, but he was able to finish the game. Hopefully the injury is just a mild strain to the shoulder area. A stinger is possible, but it wasn't the typical mechanism of that. The worst case scenario, though, would be a pec tear. He was grabbing and pulling, trying to make the tackle, and that can sometimes lead to pec tears. Again, I'm recording this on Thursday, 3 days after the game. There's been no news so far, so that's good news so far for Carlton Davis. A guy who's a surprise inactive was Brian Branch. An illness on Sunday caused him to be listed as doubtful. This was interesting because most routine illnesses like respiratory infections or gastroenteritis, which is stomach flu, can resolve pretty easily within 24 hours in young, healthy guys. The fact that he was listed as doubtful instead of questionable suggests that it's slightly more serious or slightly more complicated than a routine illness. But the good news is that listing him as doubtful instead of out it means it's not something long-term or nothing serious like, say, appendicitis or Christian Mahogany's mono. The doubtful designation means he's very likely to be ready for the Cowboys game. I'm actually sort of happy he got a week off after the concussion. I don't want this hard-hitting dude stacking up concussions. Remember, he might have had a mild, undiagnosed concussion in Game 1. On X, @CooldownRat asked, does this mean he passed concussion protocol and it's not related to that? He did pass concussion protocol, but it's still possible that whatever his symptoms were related to his concussion. Concussion symptoms a few days out are almost certainly vague symptoms like nausea, headache, fogginess, fatigue. These kind of symptoms can be caused by any kind of routine illness like a sinus infection, gastroenteritis, or even just lack of sleep or playing video games too much. There's just no way to definitively say that those symptoms are related to a concussion, so it's a big gray area here. The doctor can't make any definitive conclusions. The Lions may have been just playing it safe just in case his symptoms were still a post-concussion issue, and I think that was smart. Brandon Joseph ended up filling in for him for the entire game. Joseph had only played 5 defensive snaps in his 2-year career to this point. It looked like he might have been late rotating over on the 30-yard pass to DK Metcalf that took down to the half-yard line, but overall didn't really notice him much, which is sort of good news or bad news. You don't want to notice your safeties that much generally, so maybe he played well. Now let's go over a season recap now at the bye week point, about a quarter of the way through the season. Couple major losses. Marcus Davenport, defensive end, missed Game 2 due to a growing injury, but then left elbow injury in Game 4 that's expected to be a season ender. Signed to a 1-year contract as a free agent, we were hoping he could solidify that edge position opposite Aiden, but now with him out, we need Anzarike, Josh Pascal, and maybe James Houston to hopefully step things up. The other major loss is Derek Barnes. Took a direct impact to his right knee in Game 3. May have caused a hyperextension, maybe an MCL sprain, and possibly more. He was placed on IR after the game. The earliest he could return is Week 9 versus the Packers, but from the sounds of it, he's expected to be out longer than that. There's even a possibility it's a season ender. Dan Campbell had mentioned that they're waiting to see if a ligament heals, and if it doesn't, he may end up needing surgery. Now with Barnes out, Malcolm Rodriguez and Ben Neiman saw a big increase in snaps at the linebacker position, so hopefully those guys can fill in the void well. Couple minor losses. Frank Ragnow is a short-term loss here. It's not expected to be a long-term issue. He hurt the pec early in Game 3 and missed Game 4. That was a left pec strain, also a partially torn pec, depending on how you want to say it. If the strain is mild and does not involve the tendon, he could be back after the bye versus the Cowboys. If a longer recovery is needed, I'm not expecting much longer than that. He was not placed on IR, which does suggest an injury of less than 4 or 5 weeks. To fill Ragnow's void, Graham Glasgow was moved from left guard to center, and Coyote Awasika was inserted at left guard, and they both played well. Afatu Melifonwu was placed on IR. There was a persistent ankle issue that landed him on IR before this last game. The injury was likely suffered in the second preseason game on August the 17th and was not initially expected to be long-term, otherwise the Lions would have put him on IR back then. His earliest possible return is Week 9 versus the Packers. But if starters Brian Branch and Kirby Joseph stay healthy, his absence is not a major issue. But if either of those go down, then it would be really valuable to have Melifonwu. On X at Dr. Lurker6223 asked, if you saw from the injury graphic pregame on Monday Night Football, first time I've seen anything in text for Melifonwu labeled as Achilles. Now, if this is indeed the case, it's an Achilles, and sometimes Achilles are labeled as ankles on those listings. An Achilles tendonitis would explain why this is going on for so long. Achilles tendonitis can have a variable recovery, can take a long time to heal, and because it's the Achilles, you get nervous. As a player and as a doctor, you don't want that to turn into a full Achilles rupture. I can understand a player being very hesitant to return until he's really fully healthy, because he does not want a season-ending Achilles tear. All right, let's talk about reinforcements coming soon. Broderick Martin, defensive tackle. He hyperextended his right knee on August the 24th and was placed on IR at the 53-man cutdown. That means he's ready to return anytime if they want him. Dan Campbell comments suggested he's not quite ready yet, but he should be soon. I'd expect him to start practicing in the next 3 weeks or so. Now, with Davenport out for the year, having Broderick Martin back along the D-line will be a nice option to have. Christian Mahogany is also eligible to return from IR. He missed all camp due to mono and started the season on NFI. His mono was diagnosed probably around July 20th. It's usually a 3 to 4 week recovery. He was able to return to training before the start of the regular season, which was a really good sign, though. Mahogany's return is going to be dependent on regaining his strength, his conditioning, as well as getting some mental reps in. For a rookie who missed all of training camp and has not practiced with the team for the entire regular season, the mental game might be the limiting factor for his return. Hopefully, he doesn't play much of a role this season, because if he does, that means there were injuries to guys ahead of him. There are a couple guys long-term who might be back at some point. Emmanuel Mosley, after 2 straight ACL tears, he tore his pec around August the 5th. I'm assuming this is a complete rupture with surgery. If so, hopefully he can have around a 16-week timeline, same as CJ Gardner-Johnson of last year, which would put his return back around Thanksgiving. Also, John Kominski had an MCL tear around July 30th, which was complicated enough to require surgery. Now remember, most MCLs don't need surgery, so there is something more serious going on. The initial reported estimated recovery was 5 to 6 months, which would mean January or February. Now, the Lions did have him make the 53-man roster before putting him on IR, which suggests the Lions are still hopeful that there is a chance he could return this year. Next, I want to go into a side topic talking about the 49ers and Christian McCaffrey, who has not played yet this year due to bilateral Achilles tendonitis. He went to Germany, not just for Oktoberfest, not just for a David Hasselhoff concert, but presumably for PRP or stem cell injections, which are not legal to use here in America. So let's talk about what those mean. PRP stands for platelet-rich plasma. The theory is that the platelets will help speed healing time. It's used for tendonitis, arthritis, MCL sprains, hamstrings. The bottom line, though, is there's no good evidence it's better than placebo. Studies have shown that placebo or saline injections, which is basically water injections, have the same outcomes. The studies that show that PRP works have no placebo control, which in my opinion invalidates the study. The other issue with PRP is it's not standardized what's actually in the PRP. There are over 40 PRP products on the market. They're all slightly different. It's the Wild West out there. There's no standardization. In this case, it's the Wild East, as you have to go to Germany to even get it done. Next is stem cells, which is very similar to PRP. Stem cells are derived from your own bone marrow or embryos, with the theory that the stem cells can turn into any tissue or at least help other tissues regenerate. The theory sounds good. It might help with knee cartilage, ACLs, or tendonitis, but just like with PRP, there's insufficient high-quality evidence to justify their use. It's the same issue as PRP in that the studies are often flawed and biased. In general, when it comes to vague, difficult-to-measure outcomes like healing time, injury prevention, pain, energy, things that all NFL players and all recreational athletes want to deal with, it becomes fertile ground for industries to take advantage of the placebo effect, which can be in the range of 70% efficacy. Now, I fully support those honestly trying to make medical advances, but as consumers, you do need to look at it with a slightly cynical eye. Keep in mind that most research studies are funded and performed by the company trying to sell the product. So there's a massive conflict of interest there. All right, let's move on to the Cowboys. They had some major injuries that are already affecting our game. DeMarcus Lawrence has a right Lis Frank injury. He's on IR and he's out. Micah Parsons has a left high ankle. It was not a fracture. It didn't look too bad on video. He was now placed on IR. So we're probably looking at 2 to 4 weeks here. A severe high ankle sprain could be 4 months, like with James Houston, who had a high ankle plus a fracture. So there's a lot of variability with high ankle sprains. There's a good chance Micah Parsons is going to be out for our game because it takes longer for a high ankle sprain to get better because it causes instability in the joint. With Micah Parsons being a speed rusher, needs a lot of torque with his ankle, I expect him to be out a little bit longer than you might expect. Brandon Cooks just recently was reported to have a right knee infection. He's going to miss this upcoming game this weekend. If this was just a superficial skin infection, then yes, he could definitely be back in 2 weeks. But if it's a joint infection, good chance he's out for our game. A joint infection is no joke. You need IV antibiotics. It starts getting into your bloodstream and you get systemic symptoms, which means you get fever, malaise, you just feel sick overall. Now, I know that Max Crosby last year had a septic knee, was listed as doubtful, and ended up not missing the game. He's the only doubtful in years that I know of that actually played in the game. Most guys are not going to be Max Crosby, though. So there's a good chance Brandon Cooks is going to be out for our game. All right, that's it for today. Thanks for watching and listening. The Cowboys-Steelers game is on Sunday night, so I'll be keeping a close eye on that one to see if any new injuries mount for the Cowboys. Talk to you next week.